Hello, welcome to One Moment Wiser. This is Christy Bridges, and thank you for your patience as we had a little bit of a rocky beginning there. I have someone with me today that I want you to meet. Anthony Elliott taught me something at 50 years old when I thought I was pretty good with handling my emotions and handling my communication. I went to Anthony's Tools 101 class and learned about sorting my emotions so that I make sure to feel all of them instead of jumping directly from any negative feeling into gratitude to try to rescue that feeling of uncertainty, rescue myself from that feeling. So Anthony taught me something after years and years of me working on my mental health. And today he's going to teach us some more. And so, Anthony, tell us a little bit about yourself. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks, Christy, for having me on. I'm honored to be a guest. Uh,
Yeah.
Part of my journey in becoming a pastoral counselor really started out of my own brokenness and my own need. And I was so far down on the awareness scale, I didn't even realize that I had needs in the first place. And that may
Mm.
sound like a very arrogant statement, but it was really more just an ignorant statement. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And through uh, a lot of work, a lot of classes, a lot of counsel, um, I began to do the work on myself to be hopefully closer to what God created me to be. And through that journey, I've learned a host of things. It's really made a huge impact in my life. And so I want to be a part of doing that for other people, to give back and to some degree of what people have given to me. And so
I
that's really my heart in doing this.
I appreciate that. And I'm grateful for the way you so patiently explain I don't know, things that like you said, people who don't even realize that they have things to deal with. You explain things in a way that doesn't make us feel stupid or like we've got it all wrong, but opens up new doors for us, new avenues for really having good relationships and not getting ourselves into um, some of the messes that we get into. Now, you're going to be presenting at Believers Church on October 5th a trust building workshop. And I know in my own life, lack of trust has almost destroyed relationships. And when I have lost trust in someone who's important to me, I have tried to control the relationship from that point forward, or I've just turned completely away from the relationship and been like, okay, bye. And neither of those things really bring us the satisfaction. They may give us a feeling of safety, but they don't really make us safe or satisfied. So, what got you thinking about helping people learn to build trust?
That's a great question, and again, it really stems out of my own story.
Yeah.
And if you come to the Trust Workshop, you'll get to hear a much longer version of my story as me practicing trust with the folks that come and join. But part of that trust was, um, thankfully, my wife and I just celebrated our 32nd wedding anniversary. But it was not without a lot of struggle along the way. And part of that struggle included a full divorce back in 1998.
Oh,
And we
wow.
were divorced for a full year. And because of our brokenness, because of the situations, um, we had just completely obliterated any kind of trust in our relationship. Now, it was a miracle that God actually put us back together, and you'll hear this story, but uh, when he kind of hit the reset button for us, he didn't magically fix all of our our issues. He didn't, bring us all to complete health and wholeness. And so we had to learn how to create trust again. And as I began to do my counseling work years later and become a counselor, that was something that was always very close to my heart, was seeing these very intimate relationships being destroyed by things that break the trust. And so, the biggest, or what we would call the most egregious form of that, is through an affair.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of work in affair recovery. And as I kind of built that knowledge base around the kind of the most egregious form of trust betrayal, I began to realize that trust is trust. And the principles of how we build trust and engage in trust and solidify trust works across all forms of relationships. And so that can be in the workplace, co-workers, boss, employee. It can be in families, parents, children, extended families, as well as, a closer, intimate relationship, husband and wife. And so, again, it was through my own experience and brokenness that the Lord really gave me a heart to want to help people in that space. And so these tools, kind of are tailored to work in a lot of different situations.
That's true. And you've actually worked with a lot of couples on the affair recovery process. It can happen. I know from experience that it can happen, and it change can be made, but it takes, I think, leaning into God's miracle working power and saying, we obviously can't fix it, show us how, but also really learning in the process. I think there's a reason he doesn't just give us an easy button for some of our relationship skills. We have to go through the process to really grow. But also, I've noticed at this point in my life, the trust, when we lose trust in a spouse, a lot of times we turn away or we struggle to regain that trust with someone, hopefully with a professional like you. But there are also times in our relationships with our children or with our parents where we go through kind of a point in our adult lives that we recognize some of our hangups came from things that happened when we were kids. Parents are just kids raising kids a lot of times, where they're learning what they're doing at the same time they're doing it. And we go through kind of a reckoning, I guess, process where we suddenly recognize the damage that some of our parents' immaturity caused us. And that can cause a break in the trust relationship there. So you think that the same skills that can help rebuild a marriage can also help you with, rebuilding other relationships, and even to the point of, relationships with customers and in the business world?
Oh, absolutely. Because I talk about this way, that I believe there's two sides, obviously, to trust.
Yep.
There's the one that we're most familiar with, and that is a person being trustworthy. Mm-hmm. And there is some validity to that. That's a necessary component.
Yeah.
But we tend to stop the conversation there. And so my question that I will raise is this: who was the most trustworthy person to ever walk the face of the planet? And our Sunday school answer is Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody besides me ever struggle trusting Jesus?
Right. And did he shock us at times by the way he acted, in ways that we might not have, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that the principle is, it's not just the trustworthiness of the other person that opens the gate of trust. So what's the other piece? Well, the other piece is, what's my ability to open my heart? Where have I been hurt? And what work do I need to do? I had a person describe it this way. It's like my internal truster gets broken.
Yeah.
Because here's what plays mostly in the subconscious level, but sometimes in the conscious level, is I thought I could trust you. And if you betrayed that trust, then that means I can't even trust my own decisions on who to trust.
Yeah.
And so I just close up. I put the walls up because I can't be vulnerable because I don't even know who I can trust anymore. And we start shutting down. And I love how you brought up, this, we can trace this all the way back to parenthood or childhood, in our relationship with our parents, and how we form our attachment styles.
Yeah.
Because the very foundation of trust is built as a child, being able to trust your parents to take care of you and to meet your needs, and how responsive they are and how attuned they are to you. And if that's lacking, we develop some type of a coping skill, coping mechanism uh, to survive. And
Yeah.
so we're going to carry that throughout our life, just thinking that's normal. And until somebody points it out, or you get an environment where that gets poked on a little bit, then you can start saying, well, wait a minute, was this normal? And is this the way things have to be? And then you can start doing the work to find healing from that, learn new skills, and build forward.
You mentioned something that I hear so often. I don't even know who I can trust. And we start with our parents. That builds a very strong idea in us of how we can expect the world to be. But then we also go through um, periods of connection and disconnection, trust and betrayal throughout school, throughout our growing up years. And as we're learning social skills, other kids are too, right? And so we're constantly um, putting out some trust and having it broken, putting out some trust and having it broken. And then we get into our adult relationships and that doesn't actually quit. And so that makes a lot of sense that sometimes people just get to the point where they're like, I can't trust anybody. I don't know who I can trust. And that's a very broken place to be. Why does it matter that we look at a, a trust break that's happened, and instead of just walking away, we go, I wonder if we can rebuild trust here? Why does it matter when someone's hurt us and we've already started to distrust our own ability to pick right, to be able to trust anyone? Um, why is it important for us to take the time and fix that broken trust?
Well, because part of it is me,
Yeah.
right? If I'm just closing the doors and pushing people away, I'm not dealing with whatever angst that I'm feeling in those moments.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is such a broad category that I always like to put a little disclaimers here and there, and I would never advise somebody to stay in an abusive relationship or not have healthy boundaries, all in this namesake of giving trust. Because trust is not just a switch we flip. It's not all or nothing. And especially in the process of rebuilding trust, we have to ask, how much trust is enough for today?
Ooh, yeah.
So what's appropriate for the relationship I'm in, or the reality of the situation that I'm in, that that I can do that still helps me maintain who I am and my groundedness, uh, but is willing to take some measure of risk in trusting the other person. Because ultimately, your world is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller because let's face it, none of us are perfect.
Mhm.
We are all going to betray somebody at some level somewhere.
We will all act selfishly or just ignorantly at some
Right.
point. And a lot of times people trigger something in you that was set, a trigger that was set by somebody else in an earlier experience. But I love what you said. How much trust is appropriate for this day, for this relationship, for where we are right now? That is a really, because we have the control over how vulnerable we can be. And, where you wouldn't hire someone you think might embezzle from your clients, you also wouldn't give your heart to someone who's going to wreck your life, right? So I can see that. And then where do we go from there?
Well, we talk about trust building happens in 3 phases.
Yeah.
And I make an analogy of this process much towards the grief process.
Yeah.
The grief process, whether you subscribe to the 5-step or the 7-step, it doesn't really matter. But the principle of the grief process is that's not a linear process, right? You don't start at step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and once you get to 5, you're done. No, you kind of bounce around a lot in the different phases of grief.
Yeah.
And this is going to happen as you're rebuilding trust. So phase 1 is what I call the crisis phase. And that's where you get confronted with the betrayal, you get confronted with the offense, whatever has broken the trust, that's the phase that you experience kind of the full impact on. And one of the key factors for we'll call them the offended party, is this kind of lost sense of direction. I put it in this framework of a narrative, because our narrative, in other words, the story we tell ourselves about what's going on, is how we view the world. And that's based on all of our past experiences. And our past informs the present. But it doesn't stop in the present, because we project that narrative out into the future of what I think things ought to be like, or I thought things were going to be like, or this is how I thought the world was going to operate. And suddenly something happens to say, that's not true. And this loss of narrative, this loss of the future, is what really creates the internal crisis, until you can reassemble what a new narrative is going to look like. So in the crisis phase, we want to hold space for that process. That's not the space to be making decisions and doing, off the cuff, knee-jerk reaction type things. And for the offended party, or the offenders, we're going to teach them how to engage in the compassion there, because they're going to feel the weight of the guilt of whatever their actions were that was the betrayal, the shame that'll go along with that. And they have to really work hard to process that so that they can engage with the empathy.
Yeah. And there's a
Then
trust issue there too, because the party who's guilty or who's done something that's thrown the other person into distress, that person doesn't really know if this person's going to go the whole journey with them, if their effort's going to be worthwhile. And they have to, I think, donate trust in that regard, right?
yeah, and again, it depends on the nature of the betrayal.
Right.
I also say that the impact of a betrayal is not based on the egregiousness of the action, but it's on the person's relationship with that action. And so if I grew up in an abusive household and I have an abusive boss, everybody else may think, oh well, that's just the way he is, but it may be a huge thing for me because I have a connection to that form of action.
Makes
that's
sense.
going to impact me more than the other person.
Makes sense.
So hopefully the tie that binds us together is still our desire to have a relationship with this person.
Yeah.
And that's part of the hope that it's like, okay, well, hopefully we can not do this again, or figure out how to care for each other better, in those moments. And often you can actually end up having this moves us kind of into the second phase of the trust building, is what I call the insight phase, or we also call it the meaning making phase. So it's recreating, it's rebuilding that storyline, the narrative line, to give us a context for where this betrayal happened. So I say it again like this, that there's two people in a relationship.
Yeah.
Even though one person may have acted unilaterally to break the trust, it's still going to take two people to reconcile if that's the desire.
Yeah.
Okay. And so in the second phase is where we start having to have these dualistic dialogues of what each of us brought to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of times that may bring up more stuff that throws us back into phase one, but this is where we got to go.
I'll deal with it. Yeah.
Right. So we begin to have this uh, dualistic dialogue that separates, the, or it gives us the framework to be able to answer or talk about this question of what it means to you is different than what it means to me.
Mm.
And one doesn't invalidate the other. And we
Right.
both have our own experiences of these things. And so we have to be able to have that dualistic dialogue, to listen, to hear, to understand what our relationship partner is going through, so that there would be any chance of moving forward.
And in your counseling, when you work with people, do you find that sometimes it's a challenge to get people to listen without judgment or overarching, I mean, people don't always do name calling, but they tend to throw an overarching judgment on a person, right? Um, we have to be willing to accept that someone does see things differently than us, and it's valid. And then we have to come to a compromise on how we're going to cope with that difference in understanding or in expectation.
Yeah, so that's probably one of the biggest hurdles that
Nope, you froze. We're going to sit here and wait, though. That is a big hurdle. Hey, you guys, stick around. This guy is awesome. Oh. Well, he'll be back on in just a moment, but thank you so much for joining us. If you trust, working to heal your own broken trust mechanism, um, then come October 5th at Believers Church in Tulsa. I'm sorry, no, October 5th at, um, I think it's at Anthony's place. We'll ask him when he comes back, but I'll post it on the chat so that you can sign up and work on learning those trust building tips and rebuilding trust in your own relationship. And you don't have to have broken relationships to want to learn how to make sure that your relationships are sound, right? I think he's here. I'm going to bring him on. Oh, I don't see him. All right. Oh, thank you, Michelle. So Michelle has put that in the chat so that we know where to go October 5th. And we'll put a sign up link also so that you can access that. So he's going to work on getting his camera back on. He'll rejoin us momentarily. But let's just talk about this. Just isn't worth it. I'm done because somebody has, you know, disrupted my ability to trust them. In that relationship, friendship, whatever it is that someone who has truly abused you and is a danger to you? Or is it someone who you've just seen things differently or they've done something unexpected? If it's not a dangerous relationship, you may want to talk to God about helping you to find forgiveness and about whether or not He'd like you to connect with that person. If you're a believer, we're going to be in eternity together. Jesus' last prayer for us was for unity and love in our body and the body of Christ. And so, one of the things that we do is we repair broken relationships sometimes. But I'm going to bring Anthony back on. I see that he's still here. Here he comes. Wonderful. Thank you for
Okay.
being so persistent today. I appreciate it. Okay,
You
so
gotta
you were
love
talking
technology.
about we go through the crisis phase, and then we go through this kind of reflective period of kind of sharing our own perspective, each person. Um, and I don't want to make you give away the whole workshop right here, although I would love to. But where would you like to take us next? Where do you think that someone watching today might be able to, um, go next? And you can go ahead and just continue talking through the process if you want to. I don't want to make you give away your whole workshop.
No, that's great. This is just kind of the outline, the highlights. So,
Good.
phase 3 of the
Huh?
workshop is the vision phase, and this is where we now we've dealt with the crisis, so
Yeah.
we're not dysregulated anymore. We've worked through some context, some meaning of the relationship and where it's at, and now we get to decide what the future is going to be. And this is where the rubber meets the road kind of deal. And so we have to decide, is this a relationship I want to keep, or is this not a healthy relationship for me to be in?
Yeah.
And if it is a relationship that I want to keep, I guess I use this hand, so we'll keep consistent. Then we have to decide what kind of relationship we want that to be. And so phase 3 is all about um, acknowledging, maybe grieving the loss of the old relationship and setting the new parameters for the new relationship. Maybe with the same person. Hopefully, it is the same person. It's what we're talking about. But we don't want to go back to the way things were,
Hmm.
right? That was not a good place for us. And so we want a vision and a direction of how can we do this better? How can we be more healthy moving forward? And that means we may have to reevaluate the rules, the boundaries, the expectations of the relationship and what that looks like and what that means. And so there's many types of relationships that can come out of this. There's lots of kind of practical stuff that we'll talk about how to set these new parameters, new definition of the relationship.
Mhm.
But the tool that I use the most in this part of the class is my communication tool. It's Goals for Healthy Communication. And it's really turning communication upside down. So much of our communication these days is pushing for an agreement.
Mhm.
Don't ever do this again. Well, why do I need to not ever do this again? Well, because that's the way I'm going to feel loved and cared for.
Yeah.
And so we balance, or we try to balance, these huge emotional weights on these little bitty agreements, and it just is unstable. It's unsustainable.
Yeah.
But if we turn that around and start talking about the feelings and the expectations and the heart's cry, really getting into the vulnerability, now we can throw out lots of proposals for agreements of how we can navigate that, and what is caring and what is loving. And that's what brings hope, because it's not about the performance. It's our desire to be in relationship, and things are going to get in the way of that relationship. And how do we work through that? And if we end up working through those in productive, healthy ways, our relationships actually get better. They get deeper. They're more solid. And we're humans. That's God created us for relationships. And it's not just the good times that form deep bonds. It's more the struggles we go through that form the deep bonds. And so that's where we go.
It is so true, because when we have a trust challenge, that's actually so often the place where things get really good if we make it through that together, because we have a fresh opportunity to decide what our future looks like. And sometimes, a lot of times, at least one person is going, I just want things to be the way they were, right? My dream was broken in two. I just want to go back to the way things were without this mistake. And that, like you said, is just basically, that was something in there, may have been the setup for what happened. And we have to be willing to say, back where we were didn't completely work. Let's, come together and find out, where was the dissatisfaction, where was the misunderstanding, where was the, whatever it was, where was the danger zone, so that we can go, okay, what do we really want, um, that will protect us, that will keep us more connected, in a healthy way, or that will, give us maybe the ability to be clearer about our boundaries and our needs. What are those things? Because that's going to be a better future. Um, there is no going back, right? That'll be that better future. I love that opportunity that happens. And that, if you're in the middle of that painful time, or if you're working to heal, and you kind of go through what Anthony was talking about, that back and forth, up and down of, um, you know, recovering, right? Then it can be hard to see it as an opportunity. It really, really is. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, I find that although I never wish, these difficult situations to happen to myself or to anybody else,
Right.
um, but what I often find, especially relationally, is that there's a level that we operate on from day to day, and that when a crisis happens, it necessitates, it forces us into having deeper, more meaningful, more vulnerable, more open, heartfelt conversations that we may have never had we not been in the crisis.
Yeah.
So, does it always make the crisis bad? Not really, because if you grow and more than see for us.
So we're having a little bit of an audio issue. And in a moment, I'll have you repeat what you just said. Let's see. Just popping a little bit. Don't you love modern technology? Oh, wait, it stopped. Okay, so tell us what you just said. If we're going forward, what was that?
Uh, I don't know where I broke up, so we'll try it again. So,
No worries.
if we're moving forward, the the difficult part of the crisis is, we don't want to go through the crisis, but often the crisis leads us to conversations and vulnerability and more openness than we would have ever had we not been in the crisis. So the crisis can actually have a benefit to us, that it actually can strengthen and deepen a relationship more than not having gone through the crisis in the first place. So that's where we can have some gratitude if we can. It's our glad part anyway of the crisis of, okay, we actually came out better because of the crisis.
Yeah. Um, hang on one sec. So in business, because we've talked about this being things that we can use in relationships and also things we can use in all areas of our lives. And in business, there's a mantra: fail forward, fail fast. But the concept there is when you try something, it doesn't work out, you don't trash the whole project. You figure out, where things went wrong, and in reality, that allows you to do better on that particular thing, but sometimes it gives you wisdom to use in every aspect. When you have a customer who gets mad, a lot of times that can help you to build even more loyal customer relationships in the future, because you find out that there's something that isn't as rosy as you thought it was, and it's the same thing in a marriage relationship.
For sure. Yeah, we can always learn from these things if our heart's in the right place, right? That's back to how how do I manage my trust, or can I give that trust for today, and how do I uh, how do I manage it instead of it managing me?
So, what would you say? If I have been hurt, let's think about from each person's side, right? If I have been hurt, what is maybe one or two key things that I need to do to move forward with a sense of safety?
A few things that I recommend, again, especially in the crisis phase, is first of all, um, give yourself space, right? Don't make rash decisions. Don't feel like you got to change everything because you're going through that crisis of identity that we talked about. One of the key things you can do is to maintain some structure. Again, depending on the egregiousness of the offense, that structure is going to look a little different. But keeping a routine, keeping something in your world that feels stable, so that your whole world is not collapsing around. Talk about not making vain promises. This is more for the offender in the party. That I promise this will never happen again. It's like, well, you have no basis to make that promise, so don't make the promise yet. Another key factor is, how much do you need to know? This is a very common question that people think the more they know, or the more information is divulged about a thing, that somehow that makes the other person more open or trustworthy. They've come clean, whatever the language is you want to do it. But there can be too much knowing, and actually introduce secondary traumas and uh, you know things that just start playing on tapes in our minds over and over, and our imagination can often be much worse than the reality. So there's a balance between there's information you're going to need to know, but try to understand the difference between an investigative question versus a detective question. Okay, an investigative question is the who, what's, when, why's, where, how's, the specifics. The detective question's looking for motive. It's looking for understanding. It's looking to find that context. So there's a difference there for sure.
So this makes me think, and I know that um, a lot of people come to you for the affair recovery thing, but it really makes me think of that when you're talking about how much information do you need. And there is when we're in shock, when we're in crisis, our brain is continuously trying to ruminate on what has happened. And so we can think, like Anthony was just telling us about, what kinds of questions are healthy for us to ask. It's healthy for me to know maybe who she is so that if she comes around, I don't, let her into my life, right? If she's been trying to steal my husband. It's healthy for me to know um, what holes in my husband's schedule may have happened, or what, things that we can work on to protect ourselves in the future. It's not necessarily healthy for me to know all the details about everything that happened, because that's going to draw pictures and videos in my mind or not. That's not healthy for either of us. So Anthony's coming back in a moment, but that is, oh boy, if I could make one big recommendation, I would recommend that you be careful which questions you ask, even though your desire may be to ask all of them. Thanks, Anthony.
Okay, we're back.
All right. So one more, hang on, one more question, and then we'll wrap this up. But I appreciate your diligence with this. If I am the person who has broken somebody's trust, whether intentionally or not, I am realizing now that this other person doesn't trust me, and I want that trust back. What kinds of things, like you mentioned a moment ago, don't make vain promises, right? It's so, oh, I have struggled in my own life just saying yes to things that I don't actually have the capacity to do. Or, even to the point where I watch TV shows today, and when the cop promises that we'll get your mom back alive or something, I'm like, don't make promises you don't know if you can keep. Right? Because that's a lesson I've had to learn. But what other things are there that someone who's trying to build trust might remember?
I think one of the biggest things that most of the offenders are going to struggle with early on is dealing with their own emotions. Um, we're in this committed relationship. We want at whatever level it is, and we want to see that happen. And so the weight of the guilt that we're going to feel for having done that, if this is somebody that we love and care for, is going to be almost unbearable. And every time the other person reminds us of that or brings it up just to do their own processing, we can become very defensive, push back, not very caring, not very empathetic. So dealing with your own shame around that, or your own guilt around that, those are two different things. So we won't get into that today, but that's a whole nother story. Uh, so finding your own identity again, and that's the emotional investment work. That's going to be super key, because from there, then we're going to be able to engage with more empathy. And again, we're going to understand that what it meant to me to do what I did is different from what it meant to you and how you experienced it, and to understand that, you know, you may be hurting, you may be devastated, you're going through a lot of stuff, and so I want to be able to care for that. And then, you know, lastly, I've encouraged people to be more, take more of a responsibility to be the custodian or the vigilante of the relationship. To know that the other person is not going to be in a place to really maintain the bounds and the limits of the relationship. And so just that act of saying, okay, I'm going to, you know, be in a place where I'm going to be paying more attention. I'm going to take the lead. I'm going to, you know, help keep things together so that you can have the space you need to heal.
And that really is an act of compassion. And it is hard because when we deal with our own guilt, or the shame or embarrassment, or the fear that you know, we almost lost the person, um, it can we can get frustrated when they don't get over it as quickly as we'd like them to. We can get frustrated when they bring it up because, like you said, they're still processing it and it's pretty rocky. But if we identify as the custodians of the relationship, and that doesn't mean the relationship is all on one person. In no situation should either person be in full control of the relationship or have all the responsibility, right? It's a two-person thing. But yeah, if we can go, you know what, I'm in this and I'm going to do it for, you know, I'm going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to recognize maybe that they're still just processing, and um, and somehow manage to maintain, you know, who I am, even though they're still processing. That's a good advice, Anthony. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. You do more than trust recovery. What other kinds of things do you do if somebody needed a counselor? Um, should they reach out to you for just anything?
I do all kinds, you know, from anything from just general anxieties, coping skills, you know, life skills, all the way up through, you know, marital affair recovery, whatever. My kind of niche, my bent is I love doing the relationship counseling. So marriage, premarital, anything relational is kind of my groove, but I'm totally open to doing all different kinds of counseling.
Awesome. And you have other great workshops that you do. You've actually I feel like I see your name up every few months. Someone who's doing another workshop that is super helpful for just basic life skills and you know, emotional intelligence. So we're going to put information in the comments for you all to connect with Anthony, take part in his workshops, or reach out to him for counseling. And I'm so grateful to you and to your wife. Michelle Elliott was on here just a few months ago. If you haven't seen her interview, she is a coach who is really good at Enneagram personality types and helping people really thrive in who they are. So, and Anthony, I've just, again, thank you for taking time out for this. If you are watching, maybe at the moment you don't need counseling, or you need counseling, but you also need something for those in between days when you're not seeing your counselor, check out the One Moment Wiser books. We have Wisdom Better Than Wishing, Option Ocean, Navigating the Sea of Possibility, and the 3 a.m. book, When Divorce Keeps You Up All Night. Those devotional books will give you something to think about each day and a way to connect with yourself and with God. God bless you all. We will see you next time. Bye, Anthony. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm trying to get that mute button undone.
Thank you. It was
Oh, there we go. I think it's stopping. I'm not sure. Let's see. Oh, now it's stopping.